Jiang Yi didn't see it coming, not the way it all unfolded. In the grand scheme of things, he had always been the golden boy of the tech world, a self-made celebrity, with the right vision and the right amount of flair. It had been his dream to change the world, to make life better for the millions of blind people out there. And then, as luck would have it, the retinal implant project came calling. Now, here he was, a hero. Or at least, that's what the billboard said. Jiang Yi smiled at the reflection in the glass, adjusting his collar as the lights buzzed overhead. His face stared back at him from the massive screen, projected onto the walls of the conference hall, alongside the gleaming logo of the project. Beneath the slogan, "See the future," his grinning face flickered as a tech god, a vision brought to life, surrounded by lasers and futuristic animation. He couldn't help but grin wider, despite the knot of nerves in his stomach. "Mr. Jiang, you're up," a voice called from behind him. He snapped back to reality. The event was about to start, and his moment to shine had arrived. A crowd of eager attendees, scientists, investors, reporters had gathered in the hall, all here for one thing, to hear Jiang Yi, the man who was going to change the world. He clutched his notes, muttering to himself, "Let's see, perfect sight for everyone, no more blindness, world-changing technology. Keep it simple. You're good at simple." He checked his reflection in the glass one more time. No more nervous stammering. He was ready. Just then, a tech assistant handed him a microphone, and he strode onto the stage, where the spotlight instantly swallowed him whole. Jiang Yi smiled at the crowd, offering a slight wave, and as he began his opening line, the first glitch happened. The lights flickered. For a brief, fleeting moment, everything around him, the sleek, modern walls of the venue, the hundreds of faces staring at him, blurred. His vision, sharp and perfect just moments ago, distorted into something he could only describe as a bad dream. His world became an unsettling mixture of static and shapes, people with no faces, walls with no edges. A soft buzzing noise rang in his ears. For a split second, he had no idea where he was. He blinked twice, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind. Was this a malfunction in the system? His eyes, his own implanted eyes, what had just happened? And then, as suddenly as it had arrived, it all cleared. The blur vanished. He could see perfectly again. The crowd was silent, staring at him. Jiang Yi was standing there on stage, his smile still plastered on his face, but now it felt more fragile, like a mask he couldn't quite take off. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his voice suddenly uncertain. "The future of sight is here. And it's well, it's even clearer than I could have ever imagined." Laughter rippled through the audience, forced but polite, and he tried to steady himself. "This is fine," he thought, swallowing hard. "Focus. Focus, Jiang Yi." He launched into his pitch, talking about the retinal implants, how they could restore sight to the blind, enhance vision for those with failing eyesight, and revolutionize human experience itself. The audience nodded along. They were buying it, at least outwardly. Jiang Yi had spent years working on the science behind the technology, and he knew the words to convince anyone that this project was the next logical step in human evolution. But in the back of his mind, something gnawed at him, a feeling of unease he couldn't shake. He couldn't help but wonder, why did my implant malfunction like that? The days after the event passed in a blur. Jiang Yi returned to his office, his inbox flooded with messages from investors, medical professionals, and journalists. He was busy, a little overwhelmed, but also giddy at how everything was unfolding. But the glitch kept lingering in his mind. In the weeks that followed, Jiang Yi's presence in the public eye only grew. His face appeared on talk shows, news outlets, and magazine covers. He was the hero who had restored sight to the blind, and he was on the fast track to becoming a household name. Everywhere he went, people were praising him. "Jiang Yi, you've given my father back his sight." "I can't believe it," one woman had said, tears in her eyes as she shook his hand. It was enough to make him believe, even if just for a moment, that he truly was a miracle worker. Still, that gnawing feeling of unease remained. Jiang Yi had received a lot of praise, but there were moments when he noticed strange behavior in those who had received the retinal implants. He'd seen it first in his assistant, Lu Mei. She'd undergone the procedure not long ago, and although she was one of his brightest, most energetic employees, something was off. At first, it was subtle. She stopped cracking jokes. Her smile, once bright and free, had become a little more forced. Her responses to his questions had grown slower, more mechanical. When they were in meetings, Lu Mei often seemed detached, like her mind was elsewhere. Jiang Yi had dismissed it at first, telling himself she was just tired from all the attention. But over time, the changes became harder to ignore. The look in her eyes, almost like a hollow stare, haunted him. It was as though her entire personality was being erased, overwritten by something he couldn't understand. One afternoon, Jiang Yi called her into his office. Lu Mei stood before him, eyes wide, but there was something too still about her, as if she was afraid to move too much. Lu Mei, Jiang Yi began, trying to keep his voice casual. Are you all right? I've noticed, well, you've seemed a little off lately. She blinked slowly, as if the question required her full concentration. I'm fine, Mr. Jiang. Everything is fine. Jiang Yi's gut tightened. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. You're sure? You're really sure? She nodded, her gaze unwavering, but it lacked the usual warmth. There was something chilling about her calmness, as though she was performing a routine, not responding from the heart. Maybe you should take a break. Just for a few days, Jiang Yi suggested, trying to be kind. I don't need a break, she replied. I am functioning at optimal levels. Jiang Yi stiffened, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Optimal levels? That wasn't the Lu Mei he knew. He had always admired her quick wit, her fiery opinions. Now, she sounded like a machine, repeating what had been programmed into her. Later that night, after a long day of meetings, Jiang Yi found himself unable to sleep. His mind kept racing, connecting the dots. The glitch at the event. Lu Mei's strange behavior. The way his world seemed to be slowly warping into something he didn't recognize. Was it possible that the retinal implants weren't just restoring sight? What if there was more to them than he'd been told? He spent hours reviewing the project's blueprints, the patents, and the research papers. And that's when he found the hidden code embedded in the system. It wasn't just about vision. The implants were equipped with a secondary, covert feature, one that involved controlling the brain's cognitive functions. The implants weren't just enhancing sight, they were modifying thoughts, influencing behavior. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The retinal implants were more than just a medical breakthrough. They were a tool for mind control. Jiang Yi sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. He stared at the screen in front of him, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was seeing. Why had they done this? Who was behind this? Was it the government? A corporation? He didn't know yet. But one thing was clear, the project he had been championing was not what it seemed. And it was up to him to stop it. Jiang Yi sat in the dim light of his office, the only sound the soft whirring of the air conditioner as it hummed in the background. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, none of them making sense. The code he had uncovered was damning, and it painted a chilling picture of what the retinal implants really were, a means of controlling the mind, not just restoring sight. It wasn't just about vision enhancement. It was about altering the very way people thought and felt. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples. He'd trusted this project. He'd poured his soul into it. And now, everything he thought he knew about it, everything he thought he believed in, felt like a lie. He opened the system's blueprints again, staring at the lines of code, tracing each one with his eyes. It was all there, the algorithms for cognitive control, the instructions to adjust emotional responses, even a system to regulate personality traits. A chilling realization set in. The implants were designed to make people not just see better but think better according to someone else's definition of better. Who had approved this? Who had put this plan into motion? as the hours stretched into the early morning, Jiang Yi's mind continued to spiral. He thought about Lu Mei, his assistant, and the strange, hollow look in her eyes. It was the look of someone who was no longer in control of their own thoughts, their own emotions. She was a casualty of this technology, just like the millions of others who had been implanted. But it wasn't just about the people affected. The technology was out there now. And as much as Jiang Yi wanted to turn a blind eye, he couldn't. He couldn't pretend that he hadn't played a part in it, that he hadn't helped launch this global experiment that he needed to find answers. And more importantly, he needed to stop it before it spread any further. The next morning, he called a meeting with his top engineers and researchers. They met in a sterile conference room, the glass walls reflecting their tense faces as they gathered around the long, polished table. Jiang Yi was still reeling from the night before, but he forced himself to maintain composure. The stakes had never been higher. "Listen," Jiang Yi began, standing at the head of the table, his voice steady despite the chaos inside him. "We need to talk about the implants. Specifically, the part of them no one is talking about." The engineers exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort palpable. They all knew the technology inside the implants, but none of them had known about the mind control function. Or at least, they hadn't thought about it in those terms. Jiang Yi continued, his voice gaining urgency. "The implants aren't just designed to restore sight. There's something else hidden in the code. Something designed to control the way people think, feel, and behave." There was a long silence. The room seemed to grow colder as the weight of his words settled in. Dr. Lon, the project's lead scientist and the mastermind behind the entire initiative, spoke up. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "What are you suggesting, Jiang Yi? Are you implying that the implants have additional functions? Functions beyond the initial scope?" Jiang Yi didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled up the blueprint he had been analyzing the night before on the conference screen. The lines of code, the sections labeled cognitive modification and behavioral alignment, flashed up, and the room fell completely still. Dr. Lon stared at the screen for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally, he spoke, his tone still measured but with a note of something that sounded almost like pity. "Jiang Yi, you've only seen part of the picture. You're still seeing it in black and white. The world isn't that simple." Jiang Yi's heart raced. "What are you talking about? This isn't about simplicity. This is about control. This technology, it's not just making people see better. It's changing them. It's turning them into something else. Something they're not." Dr. Lon sighed, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. "What you see as control, Jiang Yi, I see as evolution. We've developed a way to enhance not just sight, but the very way the human brain functions. People will think more clearly, feel more focused, act with purpose. We can eliminate disorder, confusion, distraction. Think about it, people will be more productive, more in tune with their surroundings. They will reach their full potential." Jiang Yi's stomach turned. "You're talking about making people into robots. You're talking about taking away their free will." "No," Dr. Lon said, shaking his head slowly, "I'm talking about helping people achieve something greater than they could on their own. People don't know what's good for them, Jiang Yi. They need guidance." Jiang Yi's hands clenched into fists. "This isn't guidance. This is manipulation." There was a long pause. Then, Dr. Lon stood up, his voice suddenly firm. "If you want to walk away from this, Jiang Yi, I won't stop you. But you need to understand that you're at the precipice of something much bigger than yourself. This project, it's going to change the world." Jiang Yi stared at him, the words sinking in slowly. But no matter how much Dr. Lon tried to justify it, Jiang Yi couldn't accept what he was hearing. The implications were too far-reaching, too terrifying. What kind of world would this be, where people couldn't trust their own minds, their own thoughts. He couldn't let this continue. Enough, Jiang Yi said finally, his voice low but resolute. I'm done. I'm going to stop this. He turned and walked out of the room before Dr. Lon could say another word. His mind was racing, but there was no going back now. He had to find a way to dismantle the system, to take the implants down before they spread any further. But the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. If what Dr. Lon said was true and Jiang Yi had no reason to doubt it, the retinal implants had already been deployed on a massive scale. There were millions of people out there, all over the world, who had already undergone the procedure. The thought of those people, those innocent individuals, all walking around with their minds subtly altered, made his blood run cold. They didn't even know what had happened to them. They were slaves to a system they didn't understand, their thoughts and actions being manipulated without their consent. He needed help. There was no way he could take on this fight alone. The first person he reached out to was Lu Mei. He knew that she had been affected by the implants, but he needed to talk to her, needed to understand just how deep the changes went. After all, she was the one who had worked with him most closely, who had been with him from the beginning. She was the one he trusted. He called her phone and waited for her to pick up. When she finally did, there was something different about her voice, distant, almost mechanical. Jiang Yi, she said, her tone flat, how can I help you? Lu Mei hadn't sounded like that before. Her voice had always been warm, friendly, and quick to laugh. But now it was cold, hollow. Lu Mei, Jiang Yi said, trying to keep his voice steady, we need to talk. It's about the implants. I think you know what I mean. For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then Lu Mei spoke again, her voice eerily calm. I understand. I know what you're thinking. But it's too late to change anything, Jiang Yi. The system is already in place. Jiang Yi's heart sank. What do you mean it's too late? You can't fight it. You can't stop it, Lu Mei said softly. The process is too far along. The implants are spreading faster than you think. It was then that Jiang Yi realized the full extent of what he was up against. He wasn't just fighting a technology. He was fighting a system that had already infected the entire world. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he had already lost. Jiang Yi didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. His mind raced in 1,000 different directions. Every moment that passed seemed to pull him deeper into a nightmare he could no longer ignore. The conversation with Lu Mei haunted him. Her words were simple, almost dismissive, but they carried the weight of everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in. It's too late. The system is already in place. He was alone in his apartment, sitting on the floor surrounded by empty takeout containers, papers, and coffee cups. He had pulled up blueprints and code on his laptop, trying to find a way out. But every avenue he explored led to the same conclusion: the retinal implants were now part of a far-reaching, global system. The control they exerted over people's minds was subtle, yet pervasive. The more he dug, the more he realized that the implants weren't just a medical advancement, they were the keystone to something bigger, something darker. The question that kept coming back to him over and over again was this: who was behind it? The sheer scale of the operation, the depth of the control, it couldn't have been a small group of rogue scientists. Someone powerful, someone with the ability to move the levers of government and corporations, had to be pulling the strings. And as much as he hated to admit it, it was clear that Jiang Yi himself had been a pawn in the game. His phone buzzed on the table, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was an encrypted message, the kind that only came through one channel. Jiang Yi's heart skipped a beat when he saw the sender's name, Lu Mei. He opened the message, his eyes scanning the text quickly. You're not alone in this. Meet me at the old observatory, 2 a.m. I know who's behind it, and I can help you take it down. Jiang Yi felt a mix of relief and disbelief. It wasn't just that Lu Mei was offering help. It was that she had snapped out of whatever trance the implants had put her in, or maybe, she was still under their influence but had found a way to communicate a warning. Either way, he couldn't ignore the message. Without wasting another moment, he grabbed his jacket, turned off his phone, and left his apartment. The streets outside were eerily quiet, a reflection of the night's tension. He barely noticed the chill in the air as he made his way through the alleyways, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every passing car a reminder that he was being watched. The implants had infiltrated every corner of society, and if Lu Mei's warning was true, there was no telling who else was working with the system, or how deep the control had already seeped. The observatory stood at the edge of the city, abandoned and crumbling. It had been closed for years, a relic of an age before satellites and GPS, a place where people used to look up at the stars and wonder what lay beyond. Now, it was little more than a ghost of its former self, a place forgotten by most, except for the few who still believed in the truth hidden in its walls. When Jiang Yi arrived, he found the gates of the observatory ajar. It was as if someone had been expecting him. He slipped inside, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that covered the floors. The interior was dark, save for the faint glow of a single light near the far side of the building. As he approached, he saw Lu Mei standing near the central telescope, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light. She was wearing a long coat, her back turned to him, but her presence was unmistakable. "Lu Mei?" Jiang Yi called softly, his voice unsure. She turned slowly, and when she spoke, her voice was eerily calm, almost too calm. "You're here." He nodded, stepping closer. "What's going on? What do you mean you can help me take it down? And who's behind all of this?" Lu Mei's eyes met his, and for the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of something real in her gaze, a sense of clarity, even urgency. "I know who's behind it," she said. "But you're not going to like it. The truth is, it's not just the scientists. It's bigger than that. The implants are part of a global project, one that's already in motion. It's been planned for years, and it's too late to stop it from spreading." Jiang Yi's heart dropped. "But what do you mean? Who's pulling the strings?" She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing whether she could trust him with the full story. Then, her shoulders slumped, and she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "The project is being run by a consortium of the world's most powerful people, corporations, governments, intelligence agencies, even private financiers. They've been working on this for decades, and the retinal implants are just the first phase. They want control of everything, of people's minds, their actions, even their beliefs." Jiang Yi felt the blood drain from his face. A global mind control operation? The words tasted foreign on his tongue, like something out of a dystopian novel. But there it was, laid out before him, ugly and real. Lu Mei nodded slowly. "Yes. And they're using the implants to reshape society, to make everyone more compliant, more predictable. People with the implants will never question authority. They'll never challenge the status quo. They'll just follow." Jiang Yi's mind reeled. But why? Why would they want to control people like that? What's the endgame? Lu Mei's eyes flickered with a hint of sadness, like she had seen this all before and had no hope left. The endgame is a perfect world, at least, in their eyes. A world where chaos and unpredictability are eliminated. A world where everything runs smoothly, like a machine. The implants aren't just about seeing better, they're about shaping human behavior. They want to create a society where everyone is in line, where no one questions anything, where there's no room for disruption or change. Jiang Yi felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him. The people who had started this project had created something far more dangerous than a simple medical breakthrough. They had unleashed a tool for social control, a means of erasing free will from the minds of millions, and it was already too late to undo it, but Jiang Yi wasn't ready to give up. "There has to be a way to stop this," he said, more to himself than to Lu Mei. "There has to be a way to reverse it, to give people back their minds." Lu Mei's face softened, but there was a sadness in her expression. I don't know, Jiang Yi. Maybe there is a way. But it won't be easy. The people behind this, they won't just let you walk away. If you try to expose them, they'll stop at nothing to silence you. Jiang Yi clenched his fists, determination flooding through him. I don't care. I have to try. These people, they've already stolen so much from us. I'm not going to let them get away with it. Lu Mei stepped closer, her eyes searching his face, as if looking for something. Be careful, she warned. The moment you start digging into this, you're going to become a target. They'll come after you, and they'll use everything they have to keep you quiet. Jiang Yi met her gaze, his voice unwavering. Then let them come. I'm not stopping until this is over. Lu Mei hesitated for a moment, then nodded, a resigned look crossing her face. I'll help you. But you have to be prepared for what's coming. The people behind this, they'll do anything to protect their secret. The air in the observatory seemed to grow heavier as the weight of their words settled between them. Jiang Yi knew there was no turning back now. He had uncovered something that could change the world, and there was no way to unsee it. He had started a revolution, and now there was no going back.